Tonight is the night Carey Price returns for the Montreal Canadiens, but for how long? Will this be the beginning of a long comeback? Could he be moved this offseason? We'll look at the future of Carey Price as well as the Anaheim Ducks. It looks like, based on information from Elliotte Friedman, the teardown has just begun and more veterans could be on the move this offseason. Plus, we have a signing in Tampa. Jonathan Toews isn't real pleased with the direction of the Blackhawks, and unfortunately, we've lost another great hockey legend. Mike Bossy has unfortunately passed away. We'll discuss his career and legacy and more coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have a lot to talk about here today. I want to kick off the video by talking about the passing of Mike Bossy, possibly the greatest pure goal scorer the NHL has ever seen. Now, unfortunately, when it comes to the record books, he's not ranked as high as some, and obviously in terms of, you hear people talk about Gretzky and Ovechkin are the main two as far as like the greatest goal scorer of all time, but there's a big argument that Mike Bossy could be that person. And to be honest, if it wasn't for injuries and he was able to play more than 10 years, I really think Mike Bossy would be the guy that Ovechkin is trying to chase down, not necessarily Wayne Gretzky. And that's just, a hypothetical thing that I think based on how he performed. But certainly, I think it's reasonable to think that he would have stood every chance to be right up there in the top one or two for goals all time. Mike Bossy was only 65 years of age. And unfortunately, as I said before, we've seen his career cut short by injuries. And now we've seen his life cut short due to illness. It's another great example of how sometimes life isn't fair and people don't get to be around as long as they'd like to and everybody else would like to as well. But Mike Bossy had one heck of a career, although a short one. He accomplished a lot in a short period of time. He was a Calder Trophy winner, a Conn Smythe Trophy winner, a 3-time Lady Byng Trophy winner, as well as a 4-time Stanley Cup winner with the New York Islanders. He had 9 consecutive 50-goal seasons. He came into the NHL as a rookie and scored 50 goals right off the bat. Had 50 or more goals up until his final year, which was his 10th year. And the only reason he didn't hit that, I believe he had 36 or 37 goals that year, but he didn't play a full schedule due to injuries. And that's the only reason why he was on pace to do it yet again. So can you imagine? We haven't seen a player like that really ever since that came in that hot and like to stay that way for that length of time. I mean, Ovechkin is kind of, somewhat comparable, I guess, but still, like, Mike Bossy was just a tremendous pure goal scorer. I won't call him a natural goal scorer because I know that's not a term he was overly fond of. In his opinion, nobody's as naturally gifted as some might make it out to be. There's still, even for the greatest people that have God-given skills that are just meant to do certain things. Like Mike Bossy, I think, was meant to score goals, but he still had to work at his craft. He still had to put in hours and hours and hours of practicing. A lot goes on behind the scenes that a lot of people don't see. Certainly to take a quote, which I seen recently, I believe it was something that Marty St. Louis has up in his home. It's a placard that says, "Champions are born when nobody is looking." And that couldn't be more truth than I've ever heard when it comes to people preparing themselves as athletes. Like, a lot of the hard work that goes in to your craft to be helping you become a champion is done on your own. A lot of it, or in your training, in your practicing, or when really there's no cameras rolling and there's really no audience, so to speak. So Mike Bossy was a great family man. Family was super important to him. He's the kind of guy, like, almost, even though he was a hockey player, he would go to work, do his job, do it very well, and go home to his family. Like, that's what he did, and his teammates respected him for that. Obviously, Brian Trottier was a huge part of his success. They made each other better. Obviously, Bossy, Trottier, and Clark Gillies, of course, was also recently passed away. Made one heck of a line during their run there. I mean, Mike Bossy was a player for me. I'm old enough to remember him playing, and I never got to see him live, of course, but when I was a kid getting into hockey, it was near the tail end. It was probably the last 2 or 3 years of Bossy's career when I really took notice of him, because I was, those young formative years, 4, 5, 6 years old, starting to watch games more, starting to notice more. And I wasn't really, cheering for team per se. It was more cheering for players that stood out to me, like, Gretzky and Bossy, and those guys were the ones that kind of stood out the most. And he's just such such the skill set and just how he had a knack for scoring. The shooting percentage on Mike Bossy was amazing. Like if you look at his career statistics, like I think it's like around 20%. Like it's insane, something you never see today. And of course, goaltenders are better today. The game has changed a lot. A lot of people say Bossy too was well ahead of his time when it comes to trying to change the game for the better, so that skilled players could have more ability to put that skill on display and kind of let the rule book be called more, so there wasn't so much hacking and clutching and grabbing and all that. Like he was certainly an advocate of that early on as well. And I know an article that if you haven't had a chance to read it, he did pen an article for the Players Tribune. I believe it was in 2017, so it's been about 5 years ago. Actually, that sounds right, because he was I believe in the article, he was writing 60 years old, and he was writing an article of advice to his younger self. And one of the things that the quote that I remember reading in this, and this is something that stood out to me ever since, I remember reading this when it was first published, saying, remember more, cherish your time more, because your time is going to be a lot shorter than you think. And that's something that can resonate with people, I think, on all levels, not just sports. We all kind of take things for granted. That's just, nature of people. We all think there's always plenty of life left, plenty of time left. But when you see careers like Bossy's cut short because of unforeseen circumstances, and then you see, a life cut short at age 65. Look at his teammate and Clark Gillies recently passed away. We can't predict the future. We don't know how much time we have. And, take his advice and make sure you cherish the moments, remember more, spend time more, enjoy your family, take in what you can, because you just never know when the time is going to be up. And he was a heck of a person, a hockey legend, because somebody who had a very big impression on me as a wee little kid learning the game of hockey, and certainly a life lost way, way too early. I know he had a big impact on a lot of people around the league. Certainly feel for Isles alumni. They've had a rough year between Jean Potvin, Clark Gillies, and now Mike Bossy. Of course, the Islanders on the ice, the current formation of the team, had a tough season as well. So Isles Nation, hopefully you can have some time healing, come back stronger next year, and let's hope for the Isles alumni's sake that we don't have any more tragedies and things happen to the greats that have been such a big part of the franchise and remain to be a big part of the team and the community and the organization as a whole. Now, moving on to some other news, some good news. We do have the return of Carey Price happening tonight. By the time this video makes it to YouTube, the game will be either starting or just getting underway. But speaking of which, the New York Islanders are in town to face the Montreal Canadiens. And just to touch on Mike Bossy for another quick second here, to me, as much as you never want to see anybody pass away, there's never a good time, there's never a good day for things like that to happen. It's just not possible, right? You never want to see that happen. But it seems kind of weird, and one of those coincidences that almost seem apropos, if you will, that the Islanders are in his hometown in Montreal to play the Canadiens today. We knew that Mike Bossy's been sick for a long time. We knew that he was, at home with his loved ones, trying his best to enjoy his final days and hours with his family. And the news comes on the day that the Islanders happen to be in town to play the Habs. It just seems kind of one of those things that just almost seems appropriate for some odd reason. But Carey Price makes his big return after 282 days of playing an NHL game. The last time we saw Price in action, of course, was in the Stanley Cup Finals in last year's NHL, of course, as the Lightning won the Stanley Cup. Carey Price has not played this year, had multiple surgeries in the offseason, battled a lot of other things that he went through the player assistance program for. And, he's finally, after all this time, ready to play an NHL hockey game. Now, of course, the big thing with Carey Price's return that we've heard lots about is this return going to be the beginning of a resurrection of his career where he can come back, really say, okay, you know what, my injuries have healed, I'm in good shape, and he's going to be feeling really good going into next year, which could be a big boost to Montreal to have him backstop the team again as maybe they take a different direction, or do they, maybe say it's time to move on from Carey Price. There's a lot of speculation, and it's just not, I know I've heard people say, oh, I hope Carey Price doesn't become the new Jack Eichel and we talk about him every day. No, I hope not either, but for the sake of Carey Price, there's a lot of people that think that it makes a lot of sense for himself and the team if they were able to move on from him this offseason. And regardless if Carey Price plays hockey anywhere next year, it's important he get in games before the end of this year to prove to himself that he can still do it, and then is feeling 100% hopefully. And if he's going to have any chance of even being moved, teams are going to want to see that he's healthy and can play. So I guess that's the big question mark. Is this like I said, the return for now, or is this going to be like a short return and then we see him, change uniforms in the offseason? It's hard to say. You can keep in mind, Carey Price has a lot of money and term left on his contract. He also holds a no move, so he's going to have all the say in the world where he goes if that conversation takes place. We don't know. We do know last year he made himself available in the expansion draft, which he felt was the right thing to do for the team. In retrospect, he was probably right considering how long he's been out. But at the same time, there's a lot of people that wondered if he would have been totally okay with going to the Kraken as well. So there's just lots to think about. The direction of this team has completely changed in a year. So do guys like Carey Price and Brendan Gallagher and so on, do they want to be a part of this, or do they want to be on a team in the last little while, like the home stretch of their career, so to speak, where they have more of a chance to win and contend for a Stanley Cup? Now, I realize Montreal was in the Cup final last year. They're in a completely different set of circumstances this year. What do Kent Hughes and Jeff Gorton think about all this? Do they think that moving Carey Price? There's so many questions we don't know. So for tonight, we're obviously going to celebrate his return. We hope from a health perspective, everything goes extremely well and that he can continue to play. And I guess we will wait and see how everything plays out. But it's certainly going to be interesting to see what this all means moving forward, considering, like we've heard Elliot Friedman and others say, that if he plays this year, it's likely going to be showcased for a potential offseason move. So time will tell, but I just hope for his personal sake that regardless of where he's at, that he's able to be healthy, play, and be his old self again. So let's hope that happens. A few other quick updates as well. We have some injury updates. Jake Muzzin is going to be back out again. Keith described it as a flare-up, not to do with the concussion that he recently suffered, but some other injury that he's been dealing with apparently, and he's going to miss the weekend games. So he's back out, which is certainly not good news. Hopefully it's nothing long-term as we get closer to the playoffs. Tristan Jarry, of course, main goaltender for the Penguins, is not traveling with the team to Boston. He's staying back for further evaluation, and that could be bad news. If Jarry ends out any kind of longer-term situation, that's going to be a big blow to that team going to the playoffs as well. So we'll have to see where that's at. Canucks captain Bo Horvat's out day-to-day as well after blocking a shot, but that could turn into a longer-term situation as well. They're still not, still going through testing and everything. It could be a longer-term situation, but for right now, they're calling it day-to-day as they continue to evaluate his health and the situation there. Of course, we saw Austin Matthews hit a new milestone, of course, hitting the 100-point plateau for the Toronto Maple Leafs. He's only a few players in Leaf history have done that. The most recent was all the way back in 1993 when Doug Gilmour, of course, that was one of the best seasons they had around that time. I remember that season real well as they went on to the Western Conference Final to do battle with the LA Kings and Wayne Gretzky. It was a heck of a year for Gilmour, and of course Matthews now has the first 100-point season for the Leafs since that time. Staying with the Leafs for a second, they're arguably the top prospect, Matthew Knies, has informed them he is going back to school, so that saga is over. We don't have to speculate any further if he's signing with the Leafs or not. He's decided that he has too much unfinished business and that he wants another shot at a national championship and going to return to school next year. So, of course, he and his agent assured the Leafs, though, that there's no issues with signing with them and that he's not trying to avoid, getting under contract with them to go to another organization or anything of that nature. It's just the fact that he wants to continue developing and win at that level before making the jump, but you have to respect. To me, there's nothing wrong with that. He's only going to be that much more mature and primed and ready for the pro leagues once he makes the jump, which will likely come in another season's time. The Lightning get a little bit of off-season business done ahead of time, signing backup goaltender Brian Elliott to another one-year extension at $900,000. Of course, he's been the backup to Andrei Vasilevsky this year, and they're pleased with him enough to get him under contract ahead of time for next season. So that part of the business is done for them. Of course, Jonathan Toews, of course, the captain of the Hawks. You have to think that after the recent interview he conducted with the Chicago Tribune, that there's a much greater likelihood of maybe a move happening in the offseason. We know Toews and Kane entering the final year of their contracts, making over $10 million a year, so it's not easy to do. They've been, obviously huge parts of the organization, even though that Chicago dynasty is kind of staying now after the whole Kyle Beach saga. Still, Captain Sirius was a big part of multiple Stanley Cup championships. He's got a heck of a career under his belt. Not quite the same player he used to be, but there's a lot of speculation on whether or not those two stick around to finish out their contracts, or if the Blackhawks attempt to move them in the offseason. Because 1 year left, they retain some salary. It should be a lot easier to do. I mean, do you think a team would take Patrick Kane for a $5 million cap hit? Heck yes, they would. I mean, all teams would be interested in that. Jonathan Toews, maybe is going to be a little trickier. I don't know how easy that would be, but I think there'd be some. If you can get a third party in there as well to retain a little bit more and knock that down further, even more likelihood, but it would cost more money for the acquiring team to do that, of course. But still, the big thing here is that it makes sense for Chicago, and most agree that the Hawks should try to trade those players because they can get excellent returns, especially in the case of Kane. Toews would be a decent return, but not to the extent Kane would, obviously, because he's still playing at a higher level. It doesn't make sense at this point for them to try to re-sign them when those contracts are up. They could start negotiating an extension this offseason if that was going to be the case. But why would they do that when they're basically going to a whole new rebuild here? I mean, Kyle Davidson confirmed that after being named a full-time general manager, that the team is going in a full rebuild mode. And clearly it's a scenario where he doesn't really know how long this is going to take. So, I mean, we've seen teams say 3 years, 4 years. But, in reality, a lot of these rebuilds are taking 7 or 8 years before the team is really ready to compete for the playoffs and be considered anywhere near a cup contender. There are exceptions to that, but on average, a lot of these rebuilds do take longer than a lot of teams sometimes think going into it. Yeah, look at Detroit. It's a good example. I mean, Buffalo is another prime example that you just can't predict anything. But then you get the Rangers are like the exception where they really rebounded quickly. But they also made some really good free agent moves and had some really good luck in the draft lottery. There was a few other X factors there you just can't predict. But Chicago, for Jonathan Toews, talked to the Chicago Tribune. He said basically that it helps him to hear more honesty from the GM and the coach, and that he feels that they need more communication. He said their last few outings were embarrassing and there's no connection in the team game, and it just kind of sounded like he was really frustrated with the direction of the team. So certainly, a guy like him is competitive. They want to win. When they're not seeing the effort on the ice and they're losing in an embarrassing type of fashion, they're going to take that hard. It's not going to be easy to deal with. And when you see the team start to ship out more and more veteran guys, and you see the roster around you getting weaker and weaker because of the inexperience, it's not going to be easy to deal with. So to me, there's no rumblings to suggest 100%, but in my own opinion here, I feel this is really going to increase the likelihood of Toews and maybe even Kane as well saying, you know what, based on this direction, it does make more sense. Why don't you try to find a trade for us? It's for 1 year, and we can determine our fate in hockey after that. I don't know. I mean, Jonathan Toews, maybe he retires a little bit early. It's hard to say. Kane, I can see him playing till much later into his 30s or 40 years old because he's in great shape and producing at a higher level. So we'll see where that goes. But to me, this could change things. When it comes to the Anaheim Ducks, I know Elliott Friedman, Jeff Merrick had a new 32 Thoughts podcast out today, and they talked about the Ducks not being done with tearing it down. Elliott Friedman was really talking about mainly John Gibson being the next big veteran that he thinks could be moved this offseason. They both had different sources, Merrick and Friedman both suggesting that with Hampus Lindholm being traded was kind of a signal to Gibson that they're really tearing things down, and that's going to be for him was going to be like a big indication that he might want out. And they were both told basically if Hampus Lindholm was not signed and he's traded, watch John Gibson next. I mean, he's a great goaltender, but when you're not getting a lot of help in front of you and your team is struggling, going through a rebuild, which they have a lot of young, exciting players, but it takes time for them to really develop, learn how to win. And like I said, with these rebuilds taking as long as they have been, he's already in his late 20s now. He's going to be near the end of this contract before they can even really think about playoffs or contending. He probably would like to be in a situation where he has a chance to win before he gets too old. You never know when that next injury is coming. You never know what your future holds. As we talked about with Mike Bossy, you got to take advantage of your opportunities because you just don't know how much time you've got. In the case of Gibson, it makes sense that he very well could find himself on the move. And to me, John Gibson's a heck of a goaltender. Started real strong this year, and it kind of faded a little bit like a lot of the team did in the second half. But that kind of goes hand in hand. When a team in front of you, performance changes, is going to affect you as well on more ways than one. So to me, it makes a lot of sense based on what they're saying that I think Pat Verbeek will consider moving Gibson for a good return this offseason, and he could be one of the big guys moved maybe ahead of the NHL draft. So keep your eyes open for him. We've talked about that a few times, but I do think it's been coming up more and more times here, different reporters, so I really think there's something to it, and that there's a better chance that he is moved sometime this summer. So let me know your thoughts on everything discussed here today down in the comments. We'll discuss further. If you're new to this channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the latest news, rumors, and analysis in all 32 NHL teams. Again, number 22, rest in peace. My condolences to the Bossy family, and I'll catch you next time.